Weedflower, Chapter 3. Before breakfast the next morning, Sumiko put on 2 sweaters over her work clothes and went out to disbud the carnations. The carnations and stalk emitted a similar scent. In the mornings, the air was thick with it. Sumiko blew on her hands to warm them. Everyone else was already working. Disbudding was women's work. On a couple of occasions when Sumiko was sick, her uncle had hired local girls to disbud. Later, she'd felt a little jealous when he'd said they did a good job. But then he'd told her that she worked faster than the other girls. Disbudding required quick judgment because you needed to decide which bud was the strongest on a plant. You pinched or clipped off the weakest buds in favor of the strong bud, so as to end up with one beautiful, strong flower. Sumiko used a special knife that she'd gotten for Christmas last year. Every year, at least one person in Sumiko's class asked her, "Are you Buddhist? Do you celebrate Christmas?" Sumiko was Buddhist, but actually, every Buddhist she knew celebrated Christmas by getting a tree and giving gifts. Uncle had painted the handle of her knife yellow and then had painted Sumiko's property on one side of the handle and "Do not touch" on the other. She always cleaned and sharpened her knife after she disbudded. She moved quickly down the row of flowers. Every so often she spotted a flower and just knew it would be the best flower. Other times, she needed to make a quick decision about which would be the best. She liked how she needed to work and think at the same time to be a really good disbudder. Auntie called out, "You'll miss the school bus." Sumiko jumped up without finishing the row, because Auntie got irate when Sumiko missed the bus and had to be driven to school by a neighbor. She just managed to change clothes, grab her books, and run like mad to the road before the bus braked to a stop at her house. Sumiko preferred to sit at the front of the school bus. Sometimes some of the boys taunted her for being Japanese, but if she sat in front, they didn't bother her unless they were in a mean mood. Today, she sat right near the driver. Her stomach gurgled in hunger because she hadn't had time to eat breakfast. She looked out the window. A few of the flower growers also grew vegetables. Before her parents had died, they had leased a celery farm 20 miles away, but she couldn't remember any of that, no matter how hard she tried. "Sumiko!" Sumiko jumped to her feet. "Yes, Mr. Johnson." "I said, name a major export of the West Indies." West Indies? Sumiko had thought the class was discussing India, not the Indies. She'd been thinking about the party again, and about how she'd hoped she would remember enough details about it to satisfy her family. She glanced down at her book. She wasn't even on the page about India, but about Venezuela. She blurted out, "Tractors." Mr. Johnson looked pained. He rubbed both sides of his forehead with his palms. It wasn't personal. He did things like that whenever anyone got a wrong answer. Tractors? What had she been thinking? She felt her face grow hot. Sometimes Mr. Johnson took out his handkerchief and wiped his eyes as if he were crying. Now he shook his head sadly and walked to the blackboard and wrote, "Sumiko, P." They were playing P-I-G. Mr. Johnson asked everybody geography questions, and then, every time a student got a wrong answer, the student got a letter. The first one to get pig was the loser. Everyone got to call the loser Pig all day. Sumiko sat down. "Susan, name a major export of the West Indies." Susan jumped up. "Bananas, Mr. Johnson." Susan smiled and sat down. Susan was one of Marcia's best friends. Neither of them had ever been pig. Neither had Sumiko, but she'd gotten P.I. twice. During class, she often found herself worrying about the farm. Once, after a strong wind, some of the cheesecloth had fallen down and crushed the carnations. Another time, Tok got stung by a wasp, and first his arm and then his head swelled up. Sumiko wasn't there, but Uncle had described it in detail, because he knew Sumiko would want to know exactly what had happened. She liked to know every important thing that happened to Tok and every important thing that happened on the farm. Now she was thinking about how Uncle had told her he would buy a present for Marcia on the way home from the flower market. "Sumiko!" shouted Mr. Johnson. She jumped to her feet again. She knew it was her lucky day because Mr. Johnson said, "Name a major export of Venezuela." She glanced down at her book and then said, "Oil." She sat down happily. The school bus passed a bunch of Nikki kids on bicycles. They were probably headed for Japanese school. Sumiko didn't attend Japanese school after regular school because her family needed her too much on the farm. They'd tried sending her to Japanese school for a while, but she'd ended up falling behind in her regular school. Sometimes she thought she might have more friends if she attended Japanese school. The bus passed Nori Morimoto on his shiny bike. He got a new one every year. His father owned a carnation empire. Once, Nori had called her Weedflower, like an insult. She'd called him Ugly Brain and gotten grounded for a week. She never went anywhere anyway, so getting grounded didn't affect her much. On Friday, after school, the bathwater was ripe, to use Auntie's word. But Sumiko didn't drain it because on Saturday, Bull was going to break up horse manure for fertilizer, and she would drain the water after he washed up from that. Bull had manure duty because he was the youngest working male. When Tok was a few years older, he would have to spread the manure. Sumiko and Auntie never bathed on the days the manure was spread, because no matter how well Bull sponged off beforehand, the water still stank after his bath. Tok bathed anyway. He loved the smell. Sometimes when Sumiko lay in bed, making up lists before she went to sleep, she thought of Tok's 4 favorite things or animals. 1. Baba. 2. Crickets. 3. Goo. 4. Bad smells. That evening, they waited 15 minutes at the dinner table for Uncle to appear. He finally hurried in, his face shining from his special room in the shed. Nobody was allowed in his special room. Uncle was trying to develop new strains of carnations and stock in there. Jishan liked to joke that Uncle was a mad scientist. "I think I've almost got it," Uncle said. "We're going to have the best carnations in Southern California." Auntie frowned. "You're late for dinner." She began spooning rice into his bowl and mumbling, "Best, second best, what's the difference? How can a flower be best?" She gasped as her eyes fell on Uncle's hands. "Look at those nails, at my dinner table." Sumiko noticed Bull and Ichiro immediately slipped their hands underneath the table. Uncle looked like Tok getting caught doing something he shouldn't. Auntie shooed Uncle away to clean his nails. Jishan laid his hands on the table, as if daring Auntie to say something to him. She didn't. Uncle returned from the kitchen and immediately began eating. At dinner each Friday, Uncle liked them all to tell of anything special on their minds. When it was Sumiko's turn, she planned to talk about the party. "Why don't you start this week?" Uncle said to Tok. "What's on your mind?" "Are they going to kill us?" Tok asked. Uncle set down his chopsticks and leaned forward. "Nobody's going to kill us." Jishan tapped Tok-Tok's arm as if knocking on a door. "I beat up anyone who try. I beat up 3 men once." Auntie frowned at Sumiko. aren't you taking care of your brother?" "I am," Sumiko said. "I told him nobody was going to kill us." But Auntie had already looked away. Uncle said, "Bull, anything on your mind this week?" Sumiko waited. She knew Bull would say something about the flowers. Bull said, "We ran out of nicotine." Most of the flower farmers used nicotine as a pesticide. Bull knew everything about the farm. He knew big facts, like how many acres of which flower they planted in what year. And he knew little facts, like where Sumiko had left her knife the only time she'd ever mislaid it. Ichiro yawned, as he so often did. He glanced ostentatiously at his watch. Tak-Tak persisted. "But what if they kill us? My friend Isamu's father said they might." Sumiko gently shushed him. She picked rice off his shirt. "You have gohen all over you," she snapped, his glasses band, but he didn't think that was funny. Uncle said again, "Nobody's going to kill anybody." Still, Sumiko noticed that Uncle and Auntie met eyes over the table, and Auntie pressed her lips together. She saw that Tak-Tak noticed as well, so she said, "Tak-Tak, do you want to play cards before you go to sleep?" "Yes!" "We'll play Handafuda." Handafuda was played with a special deck of cards, each card with a picture of a flower on it. Sumiko and her brother played a game they made up. Sometimes she invented new rules as they went along so that Tak-Tak could win. Ichiro laughed. "That old game?" "Old man," said Jishan. "Someday you be old man. I beat up 3 men at same time when I was young." Conversations with Jishan often traveled in a circle and sometimes in a figure 8. You started out one place and you ended up in the same place. The rest of the dinner time conversation was small. Tak-Tak's question had distracted everybody, and Uncle had never gotten around to asking the rest of them what was on their minds. Uncle was chattering about baseball. Sumiko was never going to get her turn to speak. Finally, she exploded. "Uncle, did you get the present?" "Get what present?" she cried out. "Did you forget? She stopped in mid-sentence. She noticed his lips quivering and his eyes starting to shine. How could he joke about something this important? "Let's see, where did I put it?" He pushed out from his chair and rummaged through the bureau. "I hope I can find it. Here it is." He opened up a box and pulled out an exquisite silk flowered scarf. "Those flowers are birds of paradise," he said. She jumped up. "Uncle, it's beautiful." She reached out, but then decided not to touch it. "How much was it?" said Auntie. Uncle didn't meet Auntie's eyes as he mumbled, $4. $4? Auntie clutched her chest. $4? That was more than a day's wages for some men. Sumiko felt guilty and ecstatic, and guilty and ecstatic. After dinner, Auntie helped her wrap the scarf. 3 times she muttered, $4, and Sumiko felt guilty again. After a game of cards with Tak-Tak, Sumiko checked her dresses once more and decided to wear the rustly blue one. Then she checked the wrapped present, which was beautiful and elegant in pink. Someday she would make up the price to Uncle.